Hey guys, this is Phil Swift here, and this is our second episode of our special interview series where we pick out fencers within the SCA or HEMA community, and we just essentially have a chat with them and get to know them better, as well as talk about anything discussion related about HEMA or fencing in general, period. So today we have a special guest here. He actually has climbed up to the highest fencing rank within the SCA, called the M.O.Ds, or Masters of Defense. But he's also known for his lessons of Destreza within the HEMA community, especially the Midwest HEMA community. He's done a couple of exhibition matches and lessons at events and whatnot as well. So this is huge for me because he's also my mentor and my master as well. Here is Jim Lai, or otherwise known as Master Kai within the SCA community. Hey Jim, how are you holding up in Chicago?
Hey Phil, it's all right. We're finally getting to spring, and maybe one day soon I'll actually be able to go out and enjoy it. But things are okay. It's good to talk to you. I haven't seen you in a while, and every time I've seen your photos, you've been just like literally up to your eyeballs in snow.
Yeah, my back, I still can't see my backyard. I can pretty much see the top of it. Me and the wife took a chunk out of it yesterday. We worked on it for an hour, and honestly, we need a jackhammer because it's just a block of ice. Right.
Yeah, no, it's crazy, but stuff like this is helping me stay sane.
It's funny that I'm in the SCA garb and you're not.
I probably just woke up more recently than you did.
Fair enough. I do like the Destreza t-shirt that you got going on. I definitely need to get my hands on one of those.
It's a really cool shirt.
Yeah.
I don't remember who had them made, but it's real cool.
Can you stand up for a second? Let what that shirt says.
It just says geometry in motion. And it's got the sword around the circle.
Oh, that's perfect. Oh, that's awesome. All right, so let's get started. So when did you start fencing, and what got you into it?
When did I start fencing? So it was in the early '90s, and I was in high school. So yeah, I've just aged myself, and that's fine. But there was a fencing team at the school, and it was kind of your traditional 3 Olympic weapons: foil, épée, saber, and it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. And when I left high school and went to college, I continued, and that's where I discovered the SCA and kind of the more historical fencing, and I joined that and never looked back.
So how did you come across the SCA? Were you just walking about and you saw a demonstration, or you saw people in armor just hitting each other on school campus or something?
Yeah, so we actually had a student activities fair, and it happened every semester at the beginning of the year, and there was a student group there, and so I recognized some folks from the fencing club and the fencing team, and one of the coaches actually was wearing like a pirate shirt, kind of like that, and he had an épée in each hand, and he was fencing with like 3 people at a time. Well, that was cool. How do I get into that? And
yeah.
That's pretty much where it all started. We didn't have any. There wasn't really HEMA or WMA at all, right? We didn't have proper simulators like this. We had épées, and we were doing the best we could with them.
Yeah,
it was a ton of fun. I gotta say.
I guess you're right. HEMA is relatively new compared to, I guess, the SCA, which has been going on since the 1950s, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So
the first SCA event was basically a bunch of students at Berkeley back in the 50s got together and decided to play around at being medieval in someone's backyard.
So it's almost like, yeah, I can see you guys as like the pioneer of historical fencing, even, right? Which is really interesting. So speaking of which, what got you into Destreza, because I assume there wasn't much Destreza around then, not even to mention like any books or translated sources. So like when was the first time you saw Destreza, and what drew you to the style?
Well, the first time I saw it was, I think, yeah, the summer of 2002. I was sort of in between. I was doing a multi-stage move from South Carolina, where I went to college, to Chicago, where I live now, and I spent some time back in New Jersey, with folks, with the family, and seeing people and reconnecting with people I hadn't seen in a few years. And so I went to some of the local practices, and I met actually a couple students of Ramon Martinez's school out in New York City. So they would come to the practices as well. And so that was really the first time I saw fencing from this tradition. And when I moved out to Chicago, I was still mostly doing pretty much an adapted form of sport fencing. But Chicago in the SCA is in an area called the Mid Realm, or the Middle Kingdom, so named because it's in the middle of the country. And by the early 2000s, they weren't using, no one was using an epee anymore, and particularly in the middle, we had really moved on to the heavier rapier simulators.
Yeah, the Schlagers.
Schlagers, right? Yeah. So this was my first like rapier in the SCA, the blade anyway, and this is a darkwood baited rapier. It's a 45-inch blade. It is,
and that's still going strong. Like there's no nicks or damages.
It's got nicks and burrs, but like I mean, it's held together really well for more than 10 years.
Wow, that's insane.
I'm actually surprised.
Yeah, I'm actually quite surprised myself.
But no, it's so when we started moving to these heavier swords, I started getting hurt. Is really what happened. I blew my elbows. I messed up my rotator cuff. Just because when you're making fast thrusts with primarily from the shoulder, you tend to and you got a 2.5 pound weight on your hand. You can hyperextend your arm pretty easily, and so I started getting injured, and I wasn't able to fence, and I started thinking maybe there's more, maybe I should do something else if I want to be able to keep doing this for a long time. And I'm fortunate to have a couple gentlemen in our local group who really were some of the first scholars of these historical manuals, at least within the SCA and within the area. And Tim and Terry, kind of took me aside and said, look, man, if you want to be able to keep doing this, don't do what we did and tear up our joints. And also at the time I'd been doing a lot of competitive Taekwondo, and so as I kind of got on the far side of 35, or at least started getting up to getting close to 35, I started hurting more. The knees hurt, back hurts, and just wasn't really physically able to do the kinds of things that I used to do when I was 19 or 25. And I remembered some of Maestro Martinez's students and the way that they fenced, and I thought that looks like it's going to be a lot lower impact on my body.
Yeah, it looked ergonomical.
It really did come from ergonomics. I want to be able to keep doing this, and now I'm 43 and I can still fight as well as I did before, or if not better. And I feel like I'll be able to do this, for another 20 years.
Yeah, that's huge. I remember like what got me into Destreza is the footwork and how cool it looked, I guess. Like they looked like they were dancing rather than fighting, or fighting and dancing at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, and because Destreza uses a lot of circular footwork and steps around and across a circle. That actually lines up pretty well with the footwork that I had already known from. Sorry, my cats are messing with stuff on the bookcase. They're like, what are these? There's swords here. What are these? So moving around in a circle was something that was already familiar to me from Taekwondo. So was fighting from a more upright, from a more upright stance. And so I found a lot of analogies between the Taekwondo footwork and what I was learning about Destreza footwork primarily from the work that Puck Curtis was doing on his blog and then later through his book.
Wow. So yeah, so that was gonna come to my other question was like, so how did you get started as someone who was fencing back then when there was no sources out? So I assume you, like Puck Curtis had his blog out. Was his book even, was his chapter in Service of Mars even out at that time? I think it was From Pages to Practice or something like that.
Yeah, so that was really the first kind of book, like complete book that I picked up, and mostly what I did is I looked at I read his posts from his project to translate a lot of the actual primary sources, and when YouTube came out, I started watching videos that he would put together. And I started working on these with Tim and Terry locally, and because they had done some Destreza training earlier, and they thought, yeah, sure, well, we'll help you do this if that's something you want to do. So that's sort of how I learned it. There really, we weren't blessed with the proliferation of books, and the strong living tradition that exists in Europe right now. It just hadn't made it over here yet. So we, we're doing the best with what we have.
Yeah. So it was just more like, all right, let's try this out, and if it works, then we'll keep that in mind, write that down. If it doesn't, okay, we got to figure out why.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just trying to interpret, what we saw in a video or what we read in the book, and make it work within the context of the safety rules that we have in our sport.
Right. And that actually leads up to my other question, and that's actually, it's Doug's question, who is Don DeRoga from the East. He actually wants to know what your approach is like what goes through your mind when you, let's say, fence a typical Italian style type of fencer.
The main thing that I learned is that, and this is what I tell students, and we've talked about this too, is that LVD or Destreza we are a kind of a fundamentally very small C conservative fighting style. I want to make sure that I'm safe before I do something that could potentially get me stabbed. One of the things about about SCA fencing is that we're trying to simulate. We're simulating a fight to incapacity. And that's kind of the way, that's sort of what our rules are looking for. So, we're trying to gauge, and it's, there's a lot of abstraction and a lot of guesswork, but fundamentally what we're trying to think of is, would that have actually injured me? Would that have caused me serious injury if it had been a sharp blade striking me on, on my unarmored body? and so I found that the approach of Destreza to really kind of fit well with that, and really what it boils down to is, can I make an attack while knowing that my opponent's blade is in a position where it cannot easily strike me? And by easily, I mean with just a single straightforward motion, either a cut or a thrust, right? I want to make sure that in order to hit me, my opponent has to do two things. They have to first move their sword away from a place where I know where it is, and then they can finally hit me. And so the principle of a Touhou, I think, is really important. Is really important to that. And I mean, let's be honest, it's a form of constraining the blade. Everyone does it. Every system maybe does it a little differently. This one just happens to work for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, because I feel like the Italian gain is quite similar. It's just less, I guess, subjected versus like in Destreza, we tend to like to have our blade on top and subject. However, it's very difficult to do that. In theory, it makes a lot of sense, but in real fencing, it's very, very difficult because no one ever lets you subject their blade like that. right? So, but
Well,
I mean, I guess
that's fine, right? Because as long as they're busy preventing me from subjecting their sword, they're not trying to hit me. And
that's
so
true.
eventually, and so I mean, if you watch, I mean, you know, if you watch the Destreza fighter fence, a lot of times what they're doing is they're continually subjecting the blade and using their footwork to move themselves into a position where they're now close enough, they're close enough to strike while the opponent is either subjected or is trying to free their blade.
Yeah.
And so, you know, gaining the Touhou and regaining the Touhou is one of the most important skills that I work on with my students, because it's, you know, because it's so important to be able to pass through this kind of zone where a fencer who will do a lot of big lunges can hit you, but you can't hit them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like when I started Destreza, what I found was difficult was when you're going along the book and you're trying to get these deep atajos, and you're just getting creamed every time because you're trying to do, you know, what it says, but then you don't realize that you are technically doing what it's saying. So as you, for instance, go for the atajo, when they disengage, that's when you gain your tempo already, or to riposte within that time, or to attempt to get another Tahoe and to keep them in defensive until you do have the opportunity to strike. But knowing that was what excelled, I guess, my skill level, and that's like a very, very hard lesson to learn. It's a steep, very steep learning curve, getting to understand that.
Especially because when you're fighting someone who's not using the system, blade on blade contact doesn't happen as often, right? We're very we like blade contact. I want to be able to feel where my opponent's sword is, and so I'm gonna touch it with my own blade, and so if someone's not doing that, then we're talking about, Rada talks about the virtual atajo, and where you're placing your sword in space over where your opponent's blade will have to go in order to strike you.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing there is we're looking at body mechanics of the shoulder harness, and kind of the center of the body to try and to essentially predict, based on where my opponent is standing and how they are holding their weapon, what they will have to do in order to strike me. So if someone's fighting with their sword, their blade like refused and way back here and low to the ground, I can still place an atajo on them, even if I'm not reaching all the way down past my knees to try and do that, by just understanding that in order to strike me, their arm has to come up. Right?
Yeah.
You can't hit someone. It's hard to hit someone when your hand is all the way down on the ground. And so if I place my blade there, in that zone where their blade would have to come up in order to hit me, I have gained an atajo, even if I haven't actually made contact with their sword. And so in order to strike me, they first have to move their blade to a different line and then attack. And while they're moving their blade to a different line, that is my opportunity to either regain an atajo of some kind and get closer, or if I'm close enough to do it, I will, that's when I'll make an attack.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, it sounds so easy to understand, but practical, it's like it took forever for me to get virtual towels down, and even till today, like it's still very difficult. Let's rewind a little bit, and we kind of got really technical before I asked you actually. So basically, what manuals like have you looked at? So obviously you. Seems like you looked into Pacheco and Rada. Was there anything else in between that you may have looked into, or?
Yeah, like I said, mostly I've taught myself through other people's translations. I don't unfortunately read Renaissance Spanish, so I can't do that. I can't read the primary sources for myself. And so I've looked at translations. I have the English translation of Tybalt's Academy of the Sword, and yeah. I have used that particularly for the drawings. The translation itself I found very difficult to read. On the other hand, a lot of the modern translations that we have from Puck, from Alberto Pombresi, and from Sebastian. Pronounce his last name, but I think it's wrong. Yeah. I have those, and I refer to those, when when I want to kind of go back and see how someone else has interpreted a particular thing. And so, you know, I'm pulling from from a number of different different subsets of this tradition.
Yeah. So for someone who's completely new and sort of like wants to get into Destreza, what would be some of the advices you would give them to help them get started?
I mean, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that it's not as complicated as it looks when you look at all the diagrams with the circles and the lines and the you know, the Vitruvian man and all of that stuff. Destreza is fundamentally a set of principles that are really about controlling your space and imposing your space on your opponent, so that you keep them off balance, and you're the one who's always sort of in charge and dictating what is happening in this fight. Which isn't really that different from any other form of rapier combat, right? If you think about the Myrists, they're fighting from the floor. They're going to subject you to pressure, so that it's always their turn. And if they ever don't have a turn, they quit and they go back and start over again. An Italian,
sounds very similar, doesn't it?
Right. An Italian fencer, they're going to gain your blade, and you're always going to be on the defensive. And whenever you disengage or parry, they're going to stab you.
Right.
So fundamentally, we're all doing the same thing. We all want to make ourselves safe by, using the geometry of our blade, right? The stronger part of the blade, and this big nice shield here to subject our opponents. The difference, I think, for Destro is that we're primarily doing it with structure and footwork and positioning, as opposed to maybe the way I used to fence, which was more looking at athleticism and hand speed.
Yeah.
So I try to simplify it. I actually don't use a lot of diagram. I don't have a diagram on the floor that I will kind of roll out. I find that it's useful to think about, but I think one of the challenges that we have in trying to use the diagrams is that people are very rarely the same size.
Yeah.
So like when you and I fight, what my distances, my measures are different from yours, and so my circle looks really different than your circle does. And so if we tried to if we were trying to work around with the same diagram, it'd be very difficult. And so I took that. I kind of took the footwork diagrams and tried to create a couple of really basic principles out of them. And some of this comes from my own background as well. My other background as well from Taekwondo and from other martial arts, where the most important thing when you're moving around this circle is have a safe structure that's going to protect your knees and joints, first of all. So when we move around the circle, you still do want to kind of aim with your front foot so that it points towards your target. That's just to protect your joints and keep your knee hinging forward and backwards the way it's supposed to. And the other thing that I advise my students is try not to let your knees touch, because we're as Destreza fencers, we're successful when we can change directions and move around our circles in different ways that help us get to that position of having an Touhou. And so once your knees have touched each other, you're now limited in the number of directions you can go. You can either go forwards or backwards, and that takes away our options, and that also gives our opponent information that says, hey, Jim is standing in this kind of way where he's almost like mid-passing step. Now I know that he can only go in this these two directions. That's information that I really didn't need to give them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the first one. I think the second one is just learning how to get the feel of what an Touhou feels like. Right? There are like you said, there are different ways to do it. There's a very steep Touhou that many of the drawings show, but all the way up to the virtual Touhou where you're not touching them at all. Yeah. And so they're all useful, and it helps to learn all of them just by practicing and getting what it feels like. So, you know, I'd use a couple of drills to train the Touhou once we've kind of worked out with the student what, you know, what they're comfortable, you know, what it feels like to them. The first drill is that the instructor, who's always the one who ends up getting hit in the end, is going to give the student opportunities to place in the Touhou. And the instructor's job is to get out of that some way. They can parry, they can disengage, they can just retreat, whatever they do. The student's job is to continually regain the Touhou, whether it's just simply by stepping and changing the line or using one of the general lines, until they feel that they are in a position where they can now strike. And in the SCA, our safety command is hold, which means everyone stop what you're doing, put your weapons down, look around, and make sure everyone is safe. So I use a different command for this drill, which is freeze. Everyone stop, but stay where you are in relative position, so that the student can attempt the attack and see if they did so safely. Again, you know, I don't want to put myself at risk by attacking my opponent until I know that I only have to do one thing to hit them, but they would have to do two things to hit me.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, and so if the attack works, great, we move on. And if it didn't, we back up and we look at maybe how it might be executed differently, or maybe that it just came too soon or too late. The other drill that we tend to use to build on that is designed to build feel, feel of the blade. The Spanish call it tacta. And so the student will place the Touhou, and then I will have them close their eyes. And then I'm going to do something. I'll either stand there, do nothing. I'll take a step backwards. I will parry their sword and, you know, sort of regain an Touhou that by force, or I'll disengage. And what they're supposed to do is, based on how that feels, respond accordingly. So if I disengage, you no longer feel the sword on one side. It really has to be, you know, on the other side, so they can take a step in the other direction, pick up the Touhou. And, you know, I do this drill with the instructor always wearing a mask, and then they can strike it. You know, if I parry across, they can disengage underneath it, regain the Touhou, and strike. If I stand there, they learn that, okay, a resting tempo is a good time to hit someone, to borrow a term from the Italians. And, you know, and if I retreat, that's also information they get, and they know that if they just step forward, they preserve the arrangement, and it's safe to move. Right. Those are the kinds of drills that I work with to really get my students comfortable reading what their opponent is doing more by feel than by sight. The less information we can use to make a decision, the faster we'll do it.
I agree. Yeah.
And also to kind of get a feel for their own particular way of employing this movement of the body and the arm and the foot, so that they can, you know, they get a feel for when they're safe and for when they have an opportunity to attack. And it's going to be different for everyone, because everyone's bodies are put together slightly differently.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's very important for them to know when they have the mechanical blade advantage or not, and to know and to be able to go through their decision tree with just feeling of the blade makes them so much more faster than doing it with their eyes, because I feel like the sensation of feel, it's a little bit faster than maybe seeing. So
that's my understanding too. You know, I'm not a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
You know,
let me ask my wife. Hold on. Is that true?
That would actually be a great. That would actually be a great conversation to have.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Another, what you mentioned with the Touhou, see, one of the things that I've noticed learning from you is that your Touhous kind of taught me a lot. See, at first I thought it was, you know, it's all in the subjection that from the strength of the arm that you subject your opponent's blade, sort of like bringing my sword down, the weight of my sword. And I was sort of forcing people into subjection. So I was forcing the Touhou with you know, strength, speed, athleticism, whatever, right? And I wasn't technically making the Touhous with the structure of my body and my footwork alone. And that's something that you've taught me over the years. And it didn't really, like, I didn't really realize how important it was until like recently. Because when you do that, when you make these Touhous with your structure and your footwork, you are able to react faster when they disengage versus when you're trying to use the strength of your arm. Because as you're pushing down, they disengage, you're going to continue going down. So you're sort of giving yourself a disadvantage. So that was like one of the key things that I learned from you that I definitely and truly appreciated. See, at first I just thought it was just all strength because you're so strong, but it's also because you're a big guy, and with all that structure, it feels like it's a heavy Touhou. It feels like you're using your arm, but really you're not. Which is
right. And this is one of the things that I've learned as you know, as both a practitioner myself and also as a teacher from working with people with different body types, right? Yeah. You know, I work with Doug, who's somehow taller than I am, shockingly, and is also really strong. So I have to fence him a different way than I fence, you know, with you, who's, you know, you're smaller than I am. You move differently than I do. And so, like, being a teacher, to be a teacher, you need to try and understand how you're, you know, what, not only what works for you and sort of what you come to the lesson with, but also trying to figure out how to make it work for your student, not only physically, like, you know, making it consistent with their body type, but also mentally and you know, mentally and emotionally, because we all have everyone has a different personality, and we carry that into a bout with us, you know. I've learned this from teaching female students, that, you know, for example, some students have more of a warm-up time, right, to get into that, you know, into that kind of fighting mindset or into that zone, because their adrenaline builds more slowly than ours does as men.
Yeah.
And so learning how to meet your student where they are has been super important. And I think that's, you know, as Destreza is basically a set of principles that we can sort of apply to sword fighting, this is, you know, that's a really important principle that I've learned for carrying the sort of philosophy of Destreza to teaching. Because you can't execute a Touhou the way I do, because you're not 6'2" and 220 pounds.
Yeah.
So yours are going to look different, and so, you know, when I have a chance to work with students, that gives me opportunities to think about how to apply these techniques when you're not, you know, when someone is physically different from me, or mentally and emotionally different from me. And I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of scholars, you know, both inside and outside of the SCA, who aren't necessarily studying Destreza, but they're you know, they're studying other historical systems, and we get a chance to look at how these, you know, how different traditions apply that principle. So, you know, to strike from a position of safety and control. And that, you know, that's taught me about how, you know, things about how to engage my lats to hold the sword, rather than trying to arm wrestle, you know, trying to arm wrestle with my opponent and really, you know, drive their blade down with the force of my arm. And that makes me, you're right, that makes us fence safer. That helps us fence longer, because we are holding our arms out here for a long period of time. These muscles are way bigger than these muscles.
For sure.
And, you know, and it helps me work with students to build an approach and a strategy that works for them, rather than trying to force them to fight like me if they can't.
Right. So let's talk about some like more controversial stuff now.
Okay.
Let's get into, well, there are very few fencers like us who are sort of like cross fencers, where we enter, you know, SCA and HEMA and like interchangeably or back and forth. What are some of the like differences that you see in both, and what do you like and not like about, you know, one or the other?
I actually enjoy all of it because I just like sword fighting. And I don't particularly care where I'm doing it, as long as it's a good group of people who are out there to enjoy, you know, to enjoy the combat sport. You know, think that you know, HEMA is sort of HEMA is sort of a newer sport, I think, and they're developing their own culture,
Yeah.
and that's great. I think it's wonderful. You know, I think that the SCA, you know, the SCA comes with both the advantage of being very large and distributed, and having sort of a long tradition of this kind of you know, steel sword combat sports. But with age and tradition also comes its own set of challenges and issues. And there are things that I think, you know, a HEMA club can do that, due to, you know, risk, liability, and sort of institutional conservativeness reasons, the SCA maybe, you know, slightly, you know, somewhat later too. So I think, you know, we've had the advantage in the SCA of doing rapier combat for a long time, because when we started, you know, fencing, what we had were epées, and then we got, and, you know, then Schlager, you know, we got Schlagers and rapier simulators, and so we have this really long tradition of fundamentally civilian point-oriented combat, or thrust-oriented, point-dominated sword combat. We didn't really get into some of the earlier traditions, you know, the arming swords, the long swords, until much later. And there's still, you know, in some parts of the SCA, those are still kind of considered sort of a niche activity, because we've been doing rapier for so long and we really, really like it. And, you know, I think a lot of the HEMA clubs come at it from a different perspective, right? You know, long swords are really popular out here in the Midwest, and that is great. You know, they're building their own culture, and I think that can only be beneficial to the community as a whole, right?
Yeah.
You know, we invite some of the, you know, the HEMA community from the area to our events. We try to go participate in their events. And once we figured out, you know, what the differences in sort of safety rules are, it's all just fencing. And if I'm having a good time and you're having a good time and we're all learning something, and we're coming out of this, we're coming out of this with you know, new friends or new relationships with other scholars, everyone's a winner.
Yeah, like, I'm definitely not one for you know, dividing the two. You know, there are people who specifically hate on one or the other, and I feel like I don't get that. Right? Yeah, like
I get, if you don't want to wear a costume, maybe the SCA is not your thing. That's totally fine. I have the costumes.
Exactly, right? So, I mean, in the end, if I like the SCA because there's just more competitors in rapier, right? So you have more competitors, the events are inexpensive, and it's not just fighting, it's the culture, it's having fun, it's, you know, everything associated historically with that aspect. And in HEMA, I like the rule sets, you know, the cut and thrust part. And speaking of cut and thrust, like, what kind of future do you see with cut and thrust within the SCA? Like, I feel like it's slowly getting bigger. You know, more people are jumping into it. It's not just the mods who are kind of tired of regular rapier fencing now, you know, and then you're starting to see longsword in that as well, and arming swords and all that. So
it certainly does bring us an opportunity to have like a greater diversity of systems and techniques that we play with. And that part I really love. I love cut and thrust. I think that you know, it is closer to what we would do in sort of a historical WMA or a HEMA context, because we're actually making, percussive strike, percussive strikes with the edge of the blade, rather than what we do in sort of traditional SCA rapier, which is make what's called a draw cut, right? Place the sword and slice, kind of like I would with a kitchen knife. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not chopping with a chef's knife. So I enjoy that. I think that particularly for Destreza, it lets us do more of the system, in a way that's consistent with the rules, right? We cut a lot.
Yeah.
And
Like every Italian source is mentioning, when they talk about Destreza, they're always mentioning how the upright stance and the cuts. Yeah, they're gonna cut.
I'm gonna cut you. And so fighting under a rule set that empowers that and supports that, lets you use more of the system. And I think that, and so I think that what's been happening is we've been receiving a lot of feedback and culture from some of our friends in HEMA, and that has encouraged us to continue to innovate in our own sport, right? So some of my friends out here in the area are looking at bringing other types of weapons into cut and thrust, including we've got the rubber polearm simulators now, or even some of us are making them are constructing them out of leather, to try and find a solution that will let us use some of these other types of weapons, partisans, spears, other types of hafted weapons, rubber dagger, some of the rubber rondelles that are really great for bringing grappling into the sport, because landing on top of a hilt like this would suck.
Yeah. What's your opinion on like C&T melees? Like, do you think we'll see that in the future?
Oh yeah, it's coming. Yeah, it's funny because melee combat is melee, so the team on team combat is something that we've done in the SCA for a long time, and it's something that some of the HEMA clubs are just beginning to play with, mostly because it's freaking hilarious and fun, and so that's actually created opportunities for more sharing, between the communities, and more crossover, because we have the SCA have a lot of institutional knowledge of this, and we're happy to share that, because fundamentally simulating a gang fight is great.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'd be curious to see how we would do it the SCA way, because SCA has always been safety first, which is key. And
yeah, actually, everyone should be safety first.
Right? Yeah, everybody should be safe. And the HEMA does it too, but I do like the calibration in the SCA work. Yeah, yeah. There's just like some people tend to take HEMA calibration in tournaments, and they amp it up, they ramp it up. Like they kind of, it's a bit, but the SCA, I find I really like the calibration. Like, you got Terra out there, who is originally an SCA fencer.
Yeah, Robert Childs, right?
Yeah, and he's destroying it in rapier and HEMA. He's definitely one of the best.
Probably one of the most effective rapier and dagger fighters I've ever seen.
If not the most. Yeah, and you're getting people in HEMA saying that, wow, like, he's so fast, yet every time I get hit by him, like, I barely even feel it, and it's just like just mind blown. Like, how do you hit that fast but not hurt your buddy? So I feel like we're sort of advanced in our calibration, and kind of, we practice a lot of control in the SCA, and I feel like HEMA could use some of that as well.
I think we learned that the hard way, because at the beginning what we had were epées and foils, and people did get injured when those blades broke.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we
wear minimum armor compared to HEMA too, right? So
we don't I'm not gonna I don't have like a big heavy canvas on. Typically I wear a ring mesh shirt, so they kind of the really tiny welded steel links under just kind of a shirt kind of like what you're wearing, and that's all I need. It's there to I'm the SCA. In the SCA we're trying to armor against against equipment failure. So someone's blade breaks, that ring mesh is going to protect me from really, really serious injury. It's not going to protect me from from bruises or contusions or even a broken bone if someone hits me really hard. And so I still have hard elbows. I have forearm protectors when I'm fighting a longsword, stuff like that. So we do still all want to have those things. But again, I think that just comes down to a matter of culture, and in the SCA fencing community, we just have a culture of not hitting as hard. We've also had a lot of opportunities to bring in a piece of pork shoulder and put a couple of layers of linen and wool on it, so like it's wearing a shirt, and hitting it with sharps. And it really doesn't take very much pressure at all to put a sword straight through the cloth, the meat, the cloth, the skin, the fat, and the meat, and right into the bone. Just without moving my arm, just a simple step forward, pierced this thing, and like it wasn't even there. And so I don't really feel that I need to hit someone all that hard to simulate to do something that would cause really serious injury. And so I'm not gonna.
Yeah, I could totally see that too. I guess like a lot of the arguments that HEMA fencers have, like, oh, if I don't hit hard, then it won't be fast. But see, they don't realize that you could actually hit fast without hitting hard, and it's just skill and control. But it's I guess it takes a while to kind of learn that, or for whatever reason, some of them just don't see that working. But then you have an example like Toritaka, who is like the perfect, or Robert Childs, who is the perfect example out there for that, right?
And I don't think it's, I don't want to rag on anyone for fighting the way they fight. I think, hi Ashlyn. It's everyone has their own tradition, everyone has their own safety rules, and so if that is the what people are comfortable with, it's fine. And from the HEMA events that I participated in, I think one of the reasons, I think that part of the reason for this is maybe a difference in scoring, right? So in the SCA, we call our own shots. So like if we're fencing and you hit me, if I feel a shot here, I need to evaluate very quickly. Do I think that under the rules as described, that would hurt me? And if it does, I should take that. So for me personally, if I don't ever want to be touched by a sharp sword. So if there's something that's kind of point on line or as a cut, kind of anywhere near tendons or blood vessels or important body parts, I'm going to call that good, because if someone I feel like if someone hit me with a sharp sword there, I would not really be inclined to continue fighting. I would be probably more interested in running for my life. I don't want to die. Coming from but when you're relying on judges to spot a good attack and call it, that changes the way that you have to execute techniques in competition, because the scoring is different. If all I have to convince is my opponent, I'm going to fight a different way than if I have to convince people who are watching us fight but are not right there in it. I used to do competitive Taekwondo, and it's the same thing. You had 3 judges, and 2 of them had to agree and either hold up a flag or hit a button that lit up a score in order for you to score a point. And so techniques that would be martially fine, if I hit someone with that in a street context, they would be injured, may not always score, because they don't either make a sound that the judge can hear, or they're happening, they're striking in a way that's hard to see. And so when you're in any kind of a judged bout, part of your strategy is, how do I fight in a way that will get the judges to see what I'm doing and award me points. And so if they're not getting, when the first time Robert went to Swordfish, he came back in, we were asking, what his experience was like. He's like, I had a hard time getting people to take my shots.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they couldn't see it. Like, he literally had to leave the tip on them for people to see that he scored a point.
Sometimes it was sometimes right, because if what a judge is looking for is this, right?
Yeah.
But the shot only lands, the shot comes in here, they may not see that.
Yeah.
And so, again, you fight to your rule set, and sometimes your rule set means you need to provide more information to someone who's going to determine whether or not you've scored a point. And let's put it this way, the more senses you can engage, the better. When I was Olympic fencing, I was a saber fencer. And so these things weigh like 2 ounces and they move really, really fast.
Yeah.
And so when in the mid 90s, when we didn't have electric gear, we were relying on, again, three referees. So the judge and two scoring judges to see the shots. And so if you've ever watched a high-end saber fight, there's a lot of screaming and fist bumping and jumping up and down. We're trying to convince the judge that, yeah, we did in fact score a point. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so, the more of the judge's senses I can engage as a competitor, the more likely it is, or so the theory goes, that they're going to see that I scored a point. And so if you translate that from a 2-ounce saber to a 3-pound longsword, the theory still applies, but the potential for hitting someone real hard is going to be greater, I think because I'm trying to convince someone that I've landed a blow.
Yeah.
It's a contact sport. I think everyone that participates in a tournament needs to go in knowing they're going to get hit. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's totally fine, right? There are many ways to engage in this in the sport. There are many ways to play, and none of them are wrong.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own comfort level, and as long as you as a competitor are fighting to your comfort level, there's no wrong way to do it.
That's true. All right, so one of my last questions for you, as much as I'm definitely enjoying this, definitely went over the time limit that we said we would.
I'll be honest, I've been a little worried that I'm going to forget what a sword is by the time we're allowed to come out of our houses.
Right, I know. This question came up a lot. So, for someone who's in the LGBTQ community, has it affected you, in HEMA or SCA in any way? Has it, slowed you down or anything like that? How I guess how welcoming is the community? Or have you had any differences or challenges?
I personally have not. The HEMA community within the kind of Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan area has been very open. They've been really really welcoming, really open. They're all fantastic people. And I have discovered through them an entire new source of nerdy sword T-shirts, including ones that really present a really kind of very positive and inclusive message. My favorite one just has a bunch of weapons that says in different colors. It says HEMA is diverse by definition.
Oh yeah.
And
I didn't get you one of those. That sounds wicked.
I think that's very true. So while I haven't necessarily experienced any negative consequences, I have, particularly within the SCA where people who have gained this, been recognized for a certain level of achievement, have different bits of bling and things that we wear. I've taken the opportunity to be more visible, so that people who are in the Pride community can see, oh, hey, this is someone who I can talk to. This is someone who will be a safe person for me to go to, if I'm feeling, in danger or unsafe, or if I've been harassed. And it also shows that, hey, this is an inclusive group where we don't let we don't let things like who you love or the color of your skin or your gender get in the way of recognizing you for your achievement and applauding when you do something awesome.
Yeah.
And I found that the HEMA community, in the Midwest is similarly welcoming and similarly full of great people.
Yeah.
I think the other thing though that being part of the Pride community has given me is sort of a greater level of sensitivity to the needs of my students. I've had opportunities to work with people who are gender nonconforming,
Yeah.
or who are trans, or who are women who've been socialized not to hit people, and are really trying to get or trying to square up this love of sword fighting with perhaps a lifetime of cultural teaching that says that what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think that being part of an inclusive community helps me create like a baseline of comfort for my students, so that they're not going to be concerned that I'm going to touch them inappropriately, right? Or that I'm going to be unintentionally hurtful, right? Like, if it isn't obvious, there are a lot of times, or even sometimes if it is, like, I will give my pronouns to someone, even though it's it's my pronouns, my gender pronouns are quite obvious. But I want to normalize that, so that if someone is gender nonconforming, they still feel that it's a safe learning environment for them.
Right.
I want this sport to be open to everyone, whether regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, disability. And I want to make sure that I want to find ways for everyone to enjoy it to the greatest extent possible. And the first step to that is creating an environment where people feel comfortable coming. This is really important in the SCA, because unlike a traditional martial arts school, and I think many of the HEMA clubs are like that, the SCA is not really expensive at all. As a matter of fact, you can come to practice basically for free.
Yeah.
And so the level of investment that I have as a student is a lot lower. I'm not spending $100, $200 a month for the privilege of being there. I can come and go as I please.
Mm-hmm.
And so within the SCA, I think inclusivity is important for retention, because without it, they can just go somewhere else because the cost of entry is so low. And I think that as more HEMA schools spin up and become successful, that's going to become more true of the HEMA community as well. Because, like, hey, if you really love this and there's one game in town, what are you going to do, right? You need to decide whether or not you want to participate. And if the culture of the school is not one that you like, or not one that's consistent with what you need, but they're the only one around, you have no other option. As more schools come up, as more schools become active and become successful, I think that will change, because if I thrive in kind of that kind of Cobra Kai environment, great. And if I don't, that's also fine, because I can go find a place that will have a culture that does suit me, suit me in the way I need to learn better.
That's true. Well, that's good to hear. I do have one last question. Actually,
Okay.
It's from Curtis or Michelangelo.
Hi, Mikey.
With the SCA. He's asking, what was your journey to becoming a master of defense like? Like how?
Okay.
Yeah.
So within the SCA, there are geographic regions of the organization, and these are typically, and they're represented by a king or a pair of monarchs, who are they're nerds like the rest of us who like swords and costumes, But as part of, sort of as part of the game of the SCA, we have these monarchs and they hold court. And one of the things that they do is one of the primary jobs of the monarch is to recognize people for their achievements in different things different activities we pursue. And one of them is rapier combat. And fundamentally, like, my sort of path towards it was just being out there and enjoying it started with just enjoying fencing and trying to get good at it. And after becoming good at it, starting to teach other people and helping them get good at it, and just finding a thing that I love to do, and continuing not only to do it for myself, but also starting to learn ways to help other people find and enjoy this sport too. That's really, like, fundamentally all it's about. At some point the monarchs will recognize that, and the community will the community will sort of communicate that to them, and like, that's how you receive awards in the SCA, is by doing stuff that is cool and that gets people thinking, yeah, that Phil's a good guy, and he's really good at fencing, and he's an excellent teacher, and we should recognize that. And
Yeah.
as we continually improve ourselves and contribute more to the community, that you get sort of become recognized as being more and more of a leader, until finally you sort of reach the master of defense level, and someone says, hey, basically thank you for doing all of this for so many years. Please keep it up.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to achieve that level within the SCA?
Well, I went to my first SCA event in 1997.
Wow.
And I became a master of defense in like 2016, I want to say like 2016, 2017.
Okay.
So do the math.
Yeah.
With that, well, the award hadn't been. The award was only created, within the last 10 years or so. Because again, the SCA is old and has its culture, and this was creating that award took a lot of time and a lot of institutional change.
Right.
We did create it, and we modeled it after some of the other sort of peer level awards. And so now we have it, and so kind of what I'm doing now that I am one of these people is kind of within the SCA using that platform to try and grow the sport, try to bring more people into it, and just trying to make it a more inclusive, more educational place to be.
Yeah. I'm definitely glad that you've actually been promoting the SCA, like both promoting SCA and HEMA, because of you. I've noticed ever since I left Michigan, I've noticed that there are people within the Midwest HEMA community that are cross-joining into the SCA, and they're finding a hell of a...
And the other way as well.
Yeah, and the other way as well. So I think we need leaders like you within all the communities to kind of cross-pollinate like that. And
do that, right?
Yeah.
All it takes is a love of the sport, and a willingness to listen to other people and meet them where they are.
No, for sure. Well, thank you so much for being for doing this with me. This is definitely right, a double pleasure for me, getting to talk to my master and getting to share my master with everybody, all the viewers as well. Thank you so much, Jim and Master Kai. I hope you stay safe and with all your cats and Dave and all. So.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I really do. And like I said, hopefully I'll be able to actually fence with another person again and won't have forgotten everything.
For sure. I would love to do like a Destreza talk at some point within the SCA community, because I know people have been wanting to get that sorted out. We were supposed to have like a Destreza meet in Chicago this year, but I think
now that's just not going to happen for a while.
Yeah, right. And so maybe I could finally make it to it, because I wasn't going to go this year. But if you make it next year, maybe.
All right. Sounds good, man.
Right. All right. Well, take care, and love you a bunch.
Yeah, likewise. Be safe.
Bye.